Welcome to Stumbling Toward Genius. This is the podcast for creatives where we shine a light on the challenges we all face while making things. I'm your host, Cynthia Morris. It's my joy and privilege to coach others to be the creative genius they were meant to be. I'm super excited about today's episode. I get to talk to Marcus McAllister, one of my favorite people on the planet. Marcus is a French-American full-time professional artist based in Paris for the past 25 years. In his acrylic paintings and long-term sketchbook discipline, he layers figures, animals, text, abstract signs, and mystic symbols to create meaningful, dreamlike glimpses of his inner universe. And trust me, this is a fascinating universe you want to be part of. In this episode, we're taking a tour of his creative process, how he uses sketchbooks to process his life and make art, and much more. Welcome to Stumbling Toward Genius. I'm so excited today to be with my friend Marcus McAllister. Hi, Marcus.
Yep. I'm glad to be here.
Yay. So let's tell the story of how I met you because it's so fun and so pivotal to my life. Marcus lives in Paris, France, and my friend Heather Stimler brought me over to meet him. She said, "You're going to love this guy, Marcus. He's an artist and he holds these Sunday Salons where he invites people to come into his art studio." So we went over there, and because I keep an illustrated journal and was journaling at that time, I have a record of when we met. And so here we are at Marcus's atelier, and inspired by his notebooks. There's his dog Grover. The Kira's comes later because I don't think we drank that at your place.
Oh, we might have been tea. Might have been
But
tea.
the note I made was, I want to buy his art. Invigorated by his notebooks. And I have bought your art. And one of the things that I asked you, two things I learned from you as an artist. And I remember going home to my apartment in Paris that night being so high and so stimulated by you. And that's why I always want to invite you to have conversation with so others can listen in. I said, "Art, Marcus, how do I find my voice?" And you said, "Just do. Just don't even think about it. You just do. You just fill a lot of notebooks and you just do." And then the second thing was you had these Caran d'Ache watercolor crayons. And was going to London right after that. I immediately went to this art supply store and bought some. And that really made a difference for me because the watercolor crayons were kind of an onboarding into painting. And it felt a little less intimidating than trying to use something from a tube or a pan or mixing. There's that childlike quality of using a crayon that
Much more direct, yeah.
it's direct and there's just no like pretension about it. So those things that I got from you, just permission to just don't think about the voice and style and just go and it will emerge. And then the watercolor crayons. And so over the years, I've had the fortune of knowing you and being a friend and bringing my groups over to your studio to see what you're up to.
Because that first visit, 2009?
February 22nd, 2009.
Wow. Because I remember the videos that I'd done with you before was like 2010. So yeah, time goes by so fast.
It goes by fast, and luckily for us, we chronicle it all in our sketchbooks. So tell us a little bit about your process as an artist and especially your sketchbook process.
So, okay, well, I'm here in my studio where I spend a lot of time. So that's a big part of the process, is just being in the studio. Even periods like of late where I feel like I'm not getting a lot of painting done, but I'm at least in the studio, wasting time in the studio. So that's so important. I do have my sketchbook. So here's one I started just yesterday. Still with the same cover. Well, I mean, I've changed it out, but I always have the sketchbook on me. That's the kind of the plan. Which has been since fine art school. So I did get a degree in painting and drawing, which helps that idea of it kind of helps against the doubt sometimes, going through the process of just telling you and teaching stuff. But I started doing sketchbooks from fine art school. And professor said, "You have to keep them." And I got bit and I've been doing them ever since.
So how many are you up to now?
I just started. So this one I just started is number 129. They're the three most recent ones.
Wow.
So, and you can see this one give people an idea. This is one I just finished. And talking about the carandache, I did a fox with carandache and other things, watercolor. I just did that last night, finishing up the
Wow.
sketchbook. So I can,
Yep, that's perfect.
can see. I'm basically going back in time because the sketchbook, I always have it with me. I know now, just looking at this page, this was while I was over the first of the year. I was in the countryside. There was a book with a bunch of animals. So I was just, while hanging out with friends, chatting, I was drawing animals. So just sketches from a portrait project that I had. So with the sketchbook, I always have it with me and I don't go back. So like here, I know this is right after a trip to Bayeux in the north of France, in Normandy, where you got the Bayeux tapestry. So I got to see that. And this is back in the studio. I didn't actually do these drawings directly in front of the tapestry. These are things, either photos I took or postcards I picked up. Remember, that was just after Bayeux tapestry, Bayeux tapestry. So going back in time, and a lot of it's automatic drawing because of something that comes in across my path. Um, the important thing about not going back is that I put stuff down in the sketchbook, stuff that I'm looking at, stuff that I'm interested. It's little nuggets of desire, things that I just want to be drawing. I think this came from an art magazine. It was the position of the person. This was from a book on shamanism that I picked up at a museum. And so you can actually see I was reading the book. That's also a shaman. Also, I can figure out this moment it was a couple months ago because one sketchbook is generally between 2 and 3 months. Generally, what this
Wow.
was actually in the Evelyn boutique, one of the boutiques here in Paris, because my partner was getting a perfume for his mother, and his mother wears the same perfume that my mother does. And so while he was talking to life works, but so he was talking to the sales lady, and I just was drawing a bottle. So I can remember that's kind of a moment in time of while I was like hanging out in the Guerlain boutique before Christmas. And you can see, so that's the first page of this sketchbook. When I do a sketchbook, put the start date, put the end date, and I go on. So for me, that's such a good way of structuring my life, my artwork. I have 30 years of sketchbooks.
Wow. So when you look back and see that, what do you notice when you think 30 years and you
But
see?
what's really nice to see is the consistency. The consistency, not necessarily in style or in the exact way I'm wearing, because I've evolved, but I can go back, I can see things that are still interesting to me now that I was looking at 30 years ago. Particularly with the animal that are very symbolic for me, animals that I use repeatedly. I can find some of the same images. So it's a good way of figuring out my own filters. Have the conversation about voice. We've talked about this before at different times, trying to find your voice. And I was like, no, your voice is something that just comes from doing. And I can see that that is true from my sketchbooks because the stuff that I'm doing now has roots into what I was doing 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And I can see that because I've got 30 years of sketchbooks. I haven't gone back and retouched. I just keep kind of filling up these books.
What does having that consistency and knowing that you've been consistent, what does that do for you as an artist?
Gives me a bit more, it helps with confidence because I know part of so much of what I want to do is I want to surprise myself by what I am finding when I'm doing artwork in my sketchbooks, in my paintings. I have ideas that I've been working on, things that I'm interested in, but I don't have anything pre-established. Like now I'm just going to execute.
Oh,
And because that's the way I work, it's a very intuitive way. I don't have that structure of like, okay, I've got it all figured out. Now I just have to like create the image. It doesn't work like that. So that means there's a lot of doubt, which I think is part of creativity. It's a necessary part of the process, but it's never easy. There's that moment of, oh, what am I going to do? I've got these ideas. I've listened to your podcast talking about this idea of we get so caught up in the dream of the possibility at the beginning of an idea, and then we start narrowing down into reality. And that's where real creativity comes. If we were all gods that could just create, manifest our ideas, that wouldn't be as creative, actually. Because the creativity is our ideas and reality and the interface, how we adapt to what can really happen. That's really hard. It's really
yeah.
hard.
That's where the grit is. That's where
That's where
we
the grit
grow
is.
and that's where we learn.
And so going back to your question, my sketchbooks, which I can do, the past week I was finishing a sketchbook, and I hate the moment where I'm finishing a sketchbook. It's kind of
Why?
well, it's because it's I can tell the end is coming up, and then I have to get in a new one, and so the transition of getting out of one warm bath and into the next one, kind of thing. So like this sketchbook, I just started it yesterday, and that's all I have.
That's
I
so
don't feel very protected. It's all very fresh, and I don't know what's going to happen.
what so what is it like the blank page or
It's
just
like the blank page, and it's not because I always have this. I think there's also I always have the sketchbook with me. People will look at them while I'm working on them, and in the first page, there's not the density of the whole thing where people can look, and it's so dense that I'm protected. It's very fresh. I feel like when you see the lobster coming out of its shell and it's all like shelled. That's how I feel when I get into a new sketchbook.
oh
In a few days, it'll be better. Now, I also know that this week, because I was getting the end of a sketchbook, just finished the holiday season with all the busyness, trying to get back into some, and I had a couple projects, commissioned work to work on. So now I'm getting into, I've got a couple months ahead of me to get artwork done. I've got all sorts of stuff that I've kind of the basic, now paint and building up foundation. I've got a bunch of ideas that I want to work on, sketchbook pages that are like kind of a map that I want to work from, different ideas, things that I've been working on in my sketchbook. In the recent sketchbook, there's a bunch of stags, there's shaman ideas. I've got ideas I want to work on, but from those ideas, like, oh, this would be fun. The finished result, I don't know. That's the kind
right.
of scary part. And this week, my sketchbook, knowing I was going to the end of the sketchbook, I was like, well, I'll just need to finish this sketchbook. Also, I was getting work done in the sketchbook to kind of keep from actually getting to the paintings. The way of like, I'm in the studio, I need to paint, but let me just do another sketchbook page. So I got
I
lots done.
I call that like productive procrastination. Like you're
It's
just
exact. I
kind of
told myself this
warming
week.
up, you're in it, you're still digesting and processing, and it's not like you're, categorizing your spice rack.
It's actually getting work, and I got a lot of work done, and there was a bunch of stuff that was in. I mean, I have stacks of paper over here. Can I turn?
Yeah,
So
this is your
over here
studio.
in my studio, and that spot right there, that's where I do most of my watercolor. So a lot of sketchbook work. And you can see there's like piles of paper and things on the wall. Just like behind me, there's all these photos on the wall,
Oh
like
yeah.
inspiration stuff. I have stacks and stacks and folders full of photos like that I use. And for example, this week I got through bunches of. I had a book on mantras, symbolic things. So they'd been floating around. I finally sat down and tackled that information. I don't know if I'll use it, but I've got a number of sketchbook pages and pulling that information out and actually looking at it by getting my hands and eyes on them instead of just turning the pages, actually doing the drawings. That's what all these diagrams in the past few days, Buddhist mantras and mandalas with other things going on. I got that work done. They've been on my list for about the past 6 months. I finally got to them because I'm procrastinating from those things.
Well, okay, so this is part of your process, though. This is what I
Okay,
wanted
exactly.
to go back to when you were talking about you're at the perfumery, you're drawing a perfume bottle, you're really picking up things from your world, and also the books and things you pick up and bring home from your
Right.
interests, myths, symbols, um, stories. So it's really cool to see how that becomes part of the intuitive process, your interests. It's almost, and you're a very intelligent person, and I know that you're thinking a lot, but it's almost like the sketchbook brings in the intuitive, the non-thinking, the just okay. Now, how does
Even,
this appear?
well, even more, I think the sketchbook gives me a place to kind of not pin down because I don't want to freeze it, but it does give me a place to put that, get it out
Yeah.
of the,
Oh,
and it's there. And so, like the images I just showed of these like Buddhist or these tantric diagrams, they're now in my book. And so when I go back to my sketchbooks, this is what I do a lot of times when I'm starting up new work. I'm go through the sketchbook and I'm looking for stuff, things that sort of pop. They're now in there. Like I've done a lot of look chemical symbols in the sketchbooks, but from time to time. But I've actually looked at them and digested them instead of just getting distracted and having this flurry of information. This is a spot that if we pin that down, to be able to use it as a resource. So I talk about my sketchbooks being a dream belly. This is where everything digests and
Did
simmers
you
down.
say dream belly?
Dream belly. In French, we say estomac onirico. I say that. So dream belly. It's like an organ. My sketchbook is like an organ where I can digest the stuff. I can put things in. Sometimes it's random. There's also in my sketchbooks, there's appointments. There's stuff that happens because I happen to be like in the boutique looking at a perfume bottle, waiting for something else. So, and I think it's important because it does give an opportunity to capture all that stuff that happens, put it somewhere so we don't get, so I don't get lost in it. Procrastination can be also productive because it can be generating energy as opposed to just sliding off into something else.
Well, and I'm also wondering if this is true for you. When I have my sketchbook practice, it's largely, it's kind of like I can't sit still. Give the kid a crayon and she'll be happy. That it helps to never be bored, to be present, but doing something, and then I'm not just kind of like impatient or wanting to get out of there. Does that part of what your process with a sketchbook is? Like, if you
It
hadn't
helps.
had it at the perfumery, would you be just like, okay, let's
Yeah, I
go?
would have been impatient. I would have been impatient. This gave me a chance to just kind of sit and do something. I do that often watching films, watching series, because, and I can sometimes get in where I don't do anything, but I generally have my sketchbook open. Generally have texts that I've read that I want to take some notes from, or books like the book that I was talking about had a lot of animal images in it. I mean, that kind of thing where I'll just be doing drawing. Sometimes it's very almost blind contour drawings because I'm watching film, but I can kind of go back and forth. It's a way of, because if I spend too much time, for example, with Netflix, not doing anything but just kind of watching movies, I feel like I've got all this energy kind of incarnated in like a ingrown toenail, and it's not going anywhere. And I need to be able to get it out. And so having a sketchbook with me, even just to note a couple things, helps to put that down. So even when I'm doing other things, it channels it.
Yeah.
It's very helpful because otherwise I feel like I'm all too full of stuff.
Yeah, and I wonder too, like I have that feeling with my sketchbook, and then I do a written journal, and how do people live if they're not processing or kind of excavating the stuff that comes in, and then how we relate to it, our feelings
Yep.
and thoughts. I it would be that bodily thing you
I
just
think I
did.
would be much more anxious. Temperament, I've got lots of energy, and I think I'd be much more anxious if I didn't have the sketchbook for a place to put stuff and a place to put stuff, get these thoughts out of my head. I mean, I have in my sketches also can be journal entries. A lot of times, there were periods in my life, particularly before coming to Paris, where my sketch was full of journal entries, where I was writing stuff. I got tired of being that kind of diary. But it is in my sketchbook where I'll have a phrase, particularly if there's a fight with my partner. I have a phrase that's a kind of a key point will come into the sketchbook right at that moment. So later I'll be like, oh yeah, I remember this. So there's a way of putting it out there. Well, then it's not in my head.
Yeah.
There.
So
I don't
over
have to do
30
that thing of
years, you've learned to really distill things down. You don't need to write
exactly.
the whole thing out.
I'll
You're
write the
like
whole
your
thing.
mind is attuned to capture phrases or images. So then I'm always curious about how you carry, so it's coming from the world through you into the digestive belly, the sketchbook, and then onto the pieces of art that you make.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you do a lot of layers in the sketchbook and the art. How do
Right.
you, so as you're flipping through the sketchbook and you see a symbol or a drawing or a word, how do you then take that and put it into a painting?
Well, a lot of what I do is I have the sketchbooks with me in the studio. I do a lot of I have a lot of small thumbnails of sketchbook pages. When I go through, I'll pick out thumbnails of sketchbook pages, and I will use them. Let's see if I've got one here. I do. Here's actually one on this piece of board. These are all sketchbook pages of different
Oh,
sketchbooks
so
that
what
I
do you do?
pulled
You
out,
photocopy that and shrink it down or?
or I actually will photo them and then print them out on the computer in like the
Oh,
small size.
okay,
You
okay.
can see the difference in scale
This is cool. Okay, so why the thumbnail? Why the smaller size?
because this lets me get away from. I don't want to just reproduce the sketchbook page. This lets me. I can choose elements from different sketchbooks, different time periods, and bring them together. Here, I've got some frogs I want to look at and birds. These images. there's an alchemy of a bird in like in a chemical container that it keeps popping up. So I've been able to pull this out of my sketchbook as an idea I want to look at. So here they're out floating around. They're also smaller because it's just easier, because otherwise I'd have so many images up really bigger. So using this, I look at these and I try to see what can go from maybe from this image to one of these where I've been building different textures and stuff. And there becomes a hallucination between the two. Like this could be there, and then what would that bring? And then of course, these aren't just sketches for those works, because sometimes in the works when I'm painting something, I will then go and draw on the sketchbook. Then this paintings become
Mm.
sketches for the sketchbook. There's a real, I try to keep in a movement. There's not a finished project. That's the process. Not a
Mm.
finished project. There's always a ongoing support. If I can show you, here's a painting that I'm going to have to look at in the sketchbook. So
Mm.
those two, the red one, I think is finished. The blue one I was working on yesterday, and it's been floating in my studio for about 6 months. It was an older painting that I repainted, and I worked on it yesterday. I really like it. It's mostly done. I feel like it just,
How will you know when it's done?
when it sings, when it just doesn't feel like there's anything else that needs to be done. It's almost like when you taste a pot of soup and there's not enough salt. That's what I look at that painting. It's like there is almost perfect balance of spices that it's saying it's done. It's just missing something, a pinch of salt.
So is
So
that like like a totality, like a felt sense, or you said it
yes,
sings? Do you hear it? Like, because what
I
sense?
actually almost taste it. It's like almost on my tongue. I'll look at the painting. I'll be like,
Wow.
oh, that's how I work. Now, what I end up doing that painting. So we're working on it yesterday. Today, after our session, and tomorrow, I've got a few days of just being here in the studio where I have nothing on. I will go look at that. I'll have it in front of me, and I will go through some recent sketchbooks, just kind of flip through to see what might be a possibility. And then the sketchbook that's on, I will probably do a drawing of it, at least to kind of to see what I've got, to see what might be possible. So,
Wow.
and it might not work out. I might lose it. So who knows?
It's so fun just to witness your process, and that thumbnail piece. That's genius. I haven't seen that from you before. So,
Yeah, that's actually
um,
something I've developed for the past, fairly recent actually,
yeah,
because I
yeah. It's almost like squinting or kind of getting a different perspective on it, like blurring it out a little bit to
exactly,
shrink
because
it down.
I know that my sketchbooks they're not studies for a piece. It's a work in and of itself, but they're ideas that I can use. And so having it smaller is a way of extrapolating. Sometimes I do them in black and white as well to get away from the color. Transform. It's all a question about transforming and seeing what might come from that. So
Hmm.
it's complicated, and that means I don't have a surefire way of. I feel like I'm always reinventing the wheel in some ways.
Really, really,
Yeah.
okay, because that's interesting. Because I think of you or see you as just really having a lot of clarity about your process, about how you work and what works for you. And yet, at the same time, you've talked about the doubt and not knowing, but that doesn't seem to bother you. Like you're not like insecure, like, oh no, I don't know what I'm doing, so that means it's gonna
Um,
suck.
no, actually, that's the clarity. I think the biggest clarity I have, which comes from the sketchbook of just keep turning the pages, is that not knowing is actually good. That's actually what I want. So being comfortable in that discomfort and knowing that's part of, I've used this when I've done workshops, and because periodically I'll do some workshops, really a sketchbook as a creativity tool, or some mentoring. I'm a coaching artist. You've done with coaching as well. Of I've talked about this. The moment I mean, it's really good for me to listen to myself when I say this, but I know that when I work in my sketchbook on the paintings, put stuff down, I'm like, oh, it's cool. And there's a moment which is normal. I think everybody, this is a very normal part of the creative process. We start putting stuff in, and it's getting away from this wonderful idea that we're fantasizing about. As the reality sets in, oh, but then there's a moment where it gets worse and worse, and then it breaks. And I feel like it's the moment when like we're walking out into the ocean and the waves are coming in, and we get about yay deep in the water, and then a wave comes up where it picks you up and your feet leave the bottom for just a second and it puts you elsewhere. That's what I'm looking for. And that I know is you've got to release yourself to the doubt, It's like that's part of the process. Something else will come out of this. That something else will be better than what you're imagining. I can actually show you. Wait.
I'll just say, while you're not in charge of the process is taking you away.
Exactly. That's the whole point.
It's
And that's what I'm comfortable with, knowing that process does happen. It happens enough. I've had paintings. I'm like, how did I get that? I'll see a painting and be like, how did I get that? I can almost see my own work with someone else's eyes. Like, wow, that's
that's
cool.
cool.
Like this painting right here. This is the last page. You know, I was finishing the sketchbook last night. I was wanting to go home. It was kind of late, but I kind of wanted to finish the sketchbook. And it's like, I had this fox. It was kind of funny because he had like squinty eyes. I wanted to play with it. I started drawing it in. It was fairly realistic. And a moment I was like, ah, and smeared it all out. And then went back in and kind of painted some more. And it's better for that. Even if you can kind of see this brownish haze, that was the fox. All
Oh wow.
I like wiped it down. And that happens regularly enough in my sketchbooks, in my paintings, that that's fine. There's a moment where I've got to break what I'm thinking is fine. It's not working. I was fighting with the fox and I was doing this nice little drawing and it was bugging me. I'm like, oh, well, let's play with this now. Maybe it'll be something else. So
There's just like such an intuitive trust that you have and
yeah,
knowing, like that intuitive knowing of like, that's not it. And being willing to be in that process, let your feet leave the ground, smear it all out, start over. That that seems like a real surrendering of ego or
I think
thinking
there's a
that
part of that.
like, saving that, oh, that was a nice drawing, I don't want to lose that. Like you're willing to lose stuff.
And that's the important thing is because I remember back in college, different moments, thinking, oh, this is great. I'll never be able to do something like this again. And getting away from that. And the ways like, no, all the process. And so many of my better paintings come from they're paintings that I've painted over. They've come back. I'm like, there's something not quite right, it needs to be done. I'm gonna have a hard time because like the painting's almost done. Or you can see this one.
Yeah.
That one I got to that point just before a show I did in October. And there were two others of that size that I managed to finish for the show. That one I was like, oh, not gonna happen. It's fine. So it's been 6 months now, 4 months sitting in the studio. I look at it, the things that I really like and things that need to change. It's not yet found its place. It's at a midpoint.
Do you ever worry about, like, for me, stuff gets stale? I think things do have a shelf life, and then it's just like, now I just don't care. Now I'm
But
just
that,
not into
but
it.
some of that might be good because I'm getting to the point where this one I won't care, so I'll be ready to like destroy what I really like about it. I mean, I like where the figure happened. I've never painted in the crown yet, and I was actually thinking in the shower this morning, oh, maybe the crown I need to do it something that's flat, like a flat hat. So there's ideas. I just need to get in and be like, okay, well, this thing needs to move. So let's stop worrying about what we were trying to get and let's let it go somewhere else. That's what
Yeah.
needs to happen. And I know that losing what I really like about it might be the thing to do and be to accept that I'm not going to keep everything. So I've got all these beginnings and we'll see what happens. I'll start putting things in and then maybe taking things out. Some of the paintings on the walls are older paintings. The one that one, the horizontal one, that
Yeah.
was another one for the last show in October. It
That's
had a reclining figure that I
how,
really liked. Really liked it. It was a nice rendition. And the rest of it didn't work. And so finally I was like, okay, I'll
so you painted over.
paint it over. And if I
Wow.
go up really close, there are shapes that are left from the underpainting. And it's going to give me something else. I don't know yet what, but it's there waiting for me to kind of look at it when I've got my little thumbnails and I'll be going between this and that and what was there before and all this, letting it simmer down,
And a
something
lot of
else.
things at once, a lot of things going at once, which I
Yep.
can understand. So the thing what you just said, it was a nice rendition, and I think that's really you as a mature artist. You're not about rendering things accurately. You're not so much trying to prove that you can draw a thing and be accurate. You're looking for something else. What are you going for in your art? What is your art
Like I said, I'm going to
striving
be
for?
surprised by what I find. I'm going to be surprised. I always want the image to be so real in and of itself. And I'm always, particularly when I'm working with photos and doing the drawing aspect, the reality is always going to win. That's where the information, my artwork, I'm always going to have the different translation of reality. Once we get away from that translation, once I move away, and then I can let something else out, then I find things that are light on another way of seeing. It's another way of thinking. But that's what I'm interested in, making the connections and having images that like, oh, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm feeling. So to reveal myself to myself, there's a real. I feel like I'm like kind of like an alchemist here in my studio, just pouring away, letting things kind of go along until something comes along. I wanted to
So
mention earlier something that we talk about this. One of the things I've learned, my sketchbooks have been really good for me to learn this idea because in my sketchbook, because I don't go back, I turn the page. One or two pages will be open, but when I turn that page, I'm not going to go back. Now that I've started the sketchbook, I'm not going to go back to this one that I just finished. Even if
what's
I go
important
look,
about that for you?
it's the process and it's also about letting go. If I were to go back into this sketchbook, for example, maybe this page, I might see, oh, I should have painted this way. Well, let me just do a new painting in the new sketchbook that's ongoing and not try to go back to last week or last month or last year and rework that. It's finished and it holds its space, even if the errors that it has. So to leave it, to turn that page and let go of it, has been really helpful. And so with the painting, it's the same thing I try to do. Right now, I've got all these. There's a lot of it's paper where I put stuff down, and I want to let go of it. Where I'm working like in my sketchbook, I'm going to start bringing images, painting them in, and if they don't work, well, instead of turning the page, I might cover them up like I covered up the that painting I just showed you, the horizontal one. It's a way of turning the page, not being precious about it. Get
Yes,
in,
that's one thing I hear when you were talking earlier is just there's not a preciousness, the willingness to
and get away from that.
surrender. So, what it seems like you really are confident in your process. You know what you're doing. You've been doing this for a long time. You've moved to France a long time, and um, I always make up that you moved to France because you're so into like this the archetypes and
Right?
mythology and kind of this ancient ways of being and seeing, and that you could really only fully absorb that living in Paris. That's what I make up. But why would you say you moved to
there,
Paris?
there is an element of that because I think one of the reasons why when I came to Paris the first time, I was in New York after fine art school. I think the medieval vestiges,
Yeah.
that there is the history here, and I've always been interested in history and legends and archetypes. That's what I work from. So that's what feeds me. Everybody's got their stuff, and I can see that from my sketchbooks. My filters aren't the same as someone else's, and
Oh,
that's
for
fine.
sure.
So much
Yeah.
of the process is accepting that. A few years ago, I started a whole series of nights. It was 2016. It was a big deal because I was like, oh, what I really want to do is nights. It's kind of fantasy idea. I didn't want to do bad fantasy covers, but I wanted to do these nights. And I remember having kind of a dark night of the soul in the studio. Like, Marcus, the whole point of doing artwork, not to be doing art with a capital A, with these ideas of what art is supposed to be, is to do what you want to do. And so what I wanted to be doing was nights. And so I had a bunch of images of Ingmar Bergman's Seventh Seal.
That's
So I
right.
had
I
this.
remember this. Yeah.
Yeah, you've got one of the images from
I
that.
do.
It's the one behind you. I can see it on the wall.
Yes,
Yes.
yes. That you
And
can,
but
yeah.
yeah, it's a
I
sketchbook page.
love that one.
And for me, it was so important because the idea of processing, I had to really walk myself through the idea of I wanted to do nights. The Ingmar Bergman stuff that I'd had, like screenshots, it floated in my studio for about 8 years. Like, we're gonna take this. It's Ingmar Bergman. So that gives you kind of an intellectual shield. Be like, yeah, I'm intelligent, I'm savvy, but
Oh,
what I
intellectual
really wanted to do
shield.
was just a way of reassuring myself. And I remember in the show I did, the first show of these images was a year later. And one of the images I put in, it was me, it was a self-portrait I had done. And then I ended up putting on the costume of Max von Sydow in the film. And I resisted. I said, that's just so obvious. And I did it. And it painted itself when I finally decided to do it because it's like, okay, yeah, we know I'm the knight in the series. I just need to get on, take responsibility for it, and do it. That piece ended up being remarked on in the show because it's like, okay, yeah, we get it. And then of course I moved on to other things from that show, from that series. I moved into that idea. I was the knight, and I realized it was the knight Fisher King, and then I had a period after a breakup and coming around to 50 was all like, okay, but now being Fisher King, which is the wounded knight. And he's also the one who has the grail. So the whole point, when I did a series of work and realizing in doing the work, oh, what's interesting about the Fisher King is that he's the one that's got the grail the whole time in the whole story. He's the one that's got the grail.
So you were
So
surprised it all kind of came
it all kind of,
together.
and I really like the way things, letting the process happen means I find stuff. And of course, I don't know where I'm going. That's kind of scary. And then something happens. Right now, I'm in the process of, okay, what's the next step? I've got these frogs, I've got these tags that I've been looking at. There's other ideas that will come out once I actually get into the work. So,
So it sounds like the meaning and what you would have to communicate in the catalog for your shows comes out after.
and actually, it's really interesting. I was talking to an artist that I've done some mentoring with recently, and we were talking about artist statements. And I was like, oh, the last couple of shows I did, I actually just didn't even write the artist statement. A couple of shows where I didn't do an opening because of COVID, and I was going to be there present the whole time. So I was like, I'll be there to talk about it. And actually, I'm actually better at talking. I'm a very oral. Writing, it just takes it blood and sweat and tears, and I just don't like doing it. So it worked out, and I realized no one was asking for the artist statement. The gallery person wasn't asking for it. It was like, oh, I'm here, so I'll just talk about it.
I know a lot of artists really hate doing that because it feels like they have to explain the work
Exactly.
and what when you said that people were remarking on the painting of you as the knight because they got it.
Right.
And back to that intellectual or this cognitive knowing that we so desperately want. We want to see something and understand it. I don't like that. When I see art, I want it to come at me emotionally. I want to feel it. I don't want to know the history so much. I
Mm,
maybe later, but I
right.
think that's what your art really is, seeking to connect us on this archetypal level, on this
Mm,
emotional level. They're very you're working with myths and
mm,
archetypes and dreams.
mm.
You're in other worlds with your art.
That's exactly. It's actually interesting because I think about that in my work. The colors I use, the lighting that happens in the work. It's very much a sort of internal landscape. I don't really do landscapes because that's not what I'm interested in. Everybody's got their thing. Mine happens to be this really like this world that I'm building. So, and I'm very pleased when I get responses from people who see that. Um, Instagram, really with COVID and those not being able to happen, has been a really good tool getting worked out there. Um, Getting responses from an unknown person who's just looking at my Instagram profile and sees seeing the work and saying, "Oh, there's an energy that I really like," and get it. I'm like, "Oh, thank you. This is
Yeah,
encouraging."
I want to talk about the looking, others looking, because you're very open. You've hosted these open studios.
Mhm.
You're very open with showing your sketchbook. You even have found a way to make color copies and cut
Mhm.
out pages from your sketchbook that you sell. What do you get from people? And you mentioned it earlier too, like people look always want to look.
Mhm.
Um, and I found that with my sketchbook too. It's a real friend maker.
Right, right. When you're
What
drawing pretty in public, yeah.
what do you get as an artist? What does it do for you for people to see your pages and your process?
For me, it's very much they're giving me their eyes. Is the thing I said before. Particularly when people have come to the studio. When I was still doing my Sunday teas every week, I've been doing it for a number of years. But even now, when people come to the studio or have a show up, and people are, or when I'm out, like even at a party, and somebody's pulled out my sketchbook or wants to see it, and they're looking through it. When people are looking at my work, I'm there with them watching. Particularly when they turn the page to the sketchbook, and they'll stop on different pages. Might ask about things in a show. I can see which paintings people are going to stop and look at. And they're really working for me at that moment because they're giving me the possibility to see my work from the outside, which is kind of something I try to do. And get away from what I'm trying to do. Is again, it's getting away from the ego, my stuff, see it with a new eye. And it's hard to do because we get so caught up. You know, I get caught in what I'm trying to do, and having other people look at the work is really helpful. The exchanges, talking about work, it really does help to kind of step away from nose to the grindstone in the work. It's like, oh. So
That's
I find
cool.
that really helpful.
Yeah. So you've talked about a couple of ways that you, I don't know if I'd call it stumble, but because that's the name of the podcast, I'll say that.
It's stumble, stumble.
The doubt comes in, and you mentioned procrastinating on the paintings that are on the wall now. where you can also get caught up in the caught up in your head. What are some of the other challenges that you've experienced lately or experiencing now?
Well, I think kind of an obvious answer is the challenge everyone's been facing the past couple of years, everything shifting. Even more so is just being worn out from having to adapt. Like already life has changed. So before we had to adapt, but it's been even more so in the past couple of years of having to adapt to new things, new possibilities. To say, yes, we're going to do that, God willing, if everything goes, if there's not a fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth wave, or, but having to put everything kind of semi on hold, saying we'll hope to do this, seems like all the shows. And that's been really, it's difficult for everybody. Now, something that was interesting 2 years ago is I had a really difficult moment of thinking kind of professionally, thinking of my artist career. That this was 2018. It was around the time I turned 50 and was single from a long-term relationship. It was a really shifting moment. And I realized, I found myself thinking about where I was supposed to be in my life. And this idea of going from gallery to bigger gallery to museum and this sort of professional progression. And I realized, wait a minute, I actually tell other people that the model is so exploded with social media and so many different ways of going out there. We're no longer in the same model. And then I had to really step back and say, okay, you are where you are. I've been doing this full time for a long time, making my living as an artist and having that freedom of being full time in my studio. So that's what I'm supposed to be doing, and that's where I am. It's interesting when the pandemic came and with all the changes with galleries and shows not being able to happen. And I realized, it's actually that dark night of the soul has been really good for this one because where I am personally, the important thing is to keep getting artwork done. And that's happening. I'm really good about the work I've been getting, the responses. And so even with this pandemic, I'm not able to show as much. That's kind of what I was thinking even before the pandemic. We're in a different world. No one knows what is actually the tool we need, how we're going to get worked out there. Even the models we have, with the galleries and museums, those have all been created over time and didn't exist at other moments. So art has been there the whole time. Humans, we've been communicating. The ways of getting it out there and kind of the status, well, that's kind of to be defined. So it really, for me, the struggle was reassuring myself that where I am, I'm measuring myself to my own measurements and not to like the sort of external where I'm supposed to be. Recently, just of late, I feel like, I'm feeling even better financially just from stuff that's come through. I'm like, I feel better than I have since like 2008 when that first crisis went through, which is nice because I know I have the next few months. I don't have any shows planned, and I'm just going to be in the studio. So it's good, and it's actually kind of scary because I don't have a show to work for. I've got just this lot of time to be in my studio to get work done, which means I want to get work done, and that's scary because it's like there's not external stuff. There's not the other things getting in my way. There's me and my artwork, which is good. I'm excited, and then I go, oh God.
What's scary about that? Because to me, it
it's
sounds
it
like a dream.
it does but it is the dream. Except for I'm at the point of the dream where that shifting into actual implementing. I've heard you talk about it in your
Yes,
different pod. It's
that is
that
a
moment of,
definite on ramping.
and I'm in the on ramping right now. I'm in full on ramping because I've got the months before me of like, I got stuff done. I got to finish some
Well,
projects.
okay, so what helps you? Because this is really, I mean, I've
It's,
physically felt it where it's like, all right, all the dreaming and planning and getting ready is super fun. And I love being in that space. And now I've got to get into, for me, when I'm writing, it's very much a focus. I really have to focus my mind and my attention. And for me, what I do is I'll just sneak up on myself. I'll just
that's
open up a document, and then I'll just like start writing, and then I'm like the book I'm working on now. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's almost done from just sneaking up on
that
myself.
I use the same terminology to sneak up on myself, which is
Okay,
what that's why I have all these things on the wall right now. So that I can actually pull out the paint and start putting stuff down, print patterns, and then look at it's a way of sneaking up where it's like, I'm actually not doing a painting, I'm just putting some paint down.
yeah,
So
and the sneaking is sneaking past our mind, who has thoughts about it, right? Like, oh, it's got to be this, or you've got to have this much time, or you need to be in the mood or the space or the anything the mind is saying about how it should be. That's the thing we're sneaking past. We're like going over the gate in the night.
I actually there was an artist, artist that I've done some mentors with. That actually, she doesn't even know that she mentored me today because she posted on Facebook that she's been kind of stuck and that she was being paralyzed. And her partner said, "Well, that's actually a story you're telling yourself about being paralyzed." And I was
See?
like,
Yes.
"Oh, that's exactly what I'm feeling." Because with this on ramp idea of I've got this stuff going on, and now I'm at the moment like, okay, now everything is ready. I got so much stuff done this week finishing a sketchbook. I got bills paid. I did so much of productive procrastination because I'm in here. What's nice is I've got a few days ahead of me of just being here in the studio and like just to be here in front of it, looking at these pieces and be like, yo, just go and do something. And that's where I get into the mode of like my sketchbooks. Those are all just pages on the wall that I'm going to turn. So just go in, put
Right.
something down,
Lower the bar, lower the pressure, the
which is
expectation.
nice because that's getting the energy and the saliva flowing. I'm like, ooh, let's get in here and chew on these things. So today in the studio or in the shower, was I was thinking about this painting. It's annoying me because it's been cold now months, and I started feeling like, oh, you can just do that. That might ruin it, but it'll be fun. So that might be the thing I do tonight. Just go in and just lose it.
Do it. Do something.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
just to
love
get
it.
in there.
Um, and what you just said about the sketchbook, the function, one for me especially, one of the functions of the sketchbook is there's no stakes really. There's no
Right.
preciousness. It doesn't matter. It's just playing, exploring, drawing, putting. I love
I do
seeing line appear and color appear, and it doesn't matter. There's no.
this is a lot of why I've got there's a bunch of paper on the wall. Painting on paper, I've discovered helps me get into that mode like I do in my sketchbook. It's
Yeah.
almost as if it doesn't count as much. I've learned ways of I then glue them to wood so I can actually present them. Helpful because I get stacked paper that I can just put drawings or paintings down on, as opposed to getting a canvas. And I've also that larger one that's on canvas. It's on a board, so it's not actually how it's going to end up being. It'll get stretched onto a canvas later. So there's ways of sneaking up where this doesn't count. I'm just playing.
Yeah.
So
Lots of
keeping that kind of sacred
iterations.
play. Yep.
Yeah. Ooh, sacred play. I love that.
Sacred play
Um,
is an important thing.
so I want to talk about anything else that you want to talk about, but I wonder if you want to say something about how you do sell your sketchbook pages because they're not just for you. You have
Mm.
you've been selling them for a while.
Yeah, yeah,
So do
yeah.
you want
And
to
I've
say
got to. Mm.
how did you start doing that, or what made you think, oh, I could or should or want to sell these, and how did
It's
you get
actually
it?
interesting. That started because I was doing sketchbooks in college, and then I was in New York. So it was when I came to France. I was here in France. I was actually at a wedding, and somebody had seen a sketchbook, and they're like, "Oh, I want this page." And I was like, "Okay, well, I can go and do that on a paper. I was going to do a painting of that." And they're just like, "No, I want that image." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And so that's where I figured I cut out the page and did photocopies, color photocopies. It actually worked as a way of giving me that the whole book that way.
So you put
Liberate.
the photocopy back
The
into the
photocopy
book, and
goes
you
back
sell
into the
the
book.
original page.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So like I know that painting you have on the wall that we were mentioning earlier that's behind you. There's another painting on the back of it because it's the back of the page. But next time you're in the studio, if you give me the number of the page, I can show you what's the flip side of it. And that's something I can keep those images, I can keep all that information and liberate the original pieces, the actual stuff. Now, of course, the photocopies aren't as good a quality, but I don't care. I've tried to keep from thinking of my sketchbooks as an art object. They're a tool that I use to generate images, to relate information, to keep information. So, and then I try to get that onto my paintings as well, to keep that same idea of not the object. It's not the preciousness of the object. Just
So so do you think when we buy a sketchbook page from you, we have it framed? I'm looking at the ones I have over here. They're framed, they're matted, and it becomes an art object. But I wonder if what we want and what that person wanted is to have a piece of the process, the roughness, the rawness, the notes. I love that your writing too is almost unintelligible. I can't, because it's like, how do you share the precious, personal writing that's in there? It's like, well, you can kind of really read it.
I can't really read it. That's kind of where text becomes texture in my work. That's all
Ooh,
part of the process. It's part of something, how to get stuff out there and make it into an industry. I like seeing my pieces, sketchbook pages, pieces on a wall, particularly elsewhere. And so I'm not against precious quality and I like seeing them framed and everything. I just need to make sure I'm not falling into the trap in my head
Right.
making
Of
precious
making
objects.
it all pretty and
Yep.
blah blah. Yeah.
I actually the painting on paper. A lot of times I end up gluing onto wood or onto canvas. Now and they become even better because they're stripped out. Sometimes if it's really thin paper, so as I'm painting, it's all wrinkly and they're fine. And then when I actually the ones that I like that I want to show that I'm going to put onto wood, and they suddenly become majestic or something else, which is nice because they can have it. But I want to avoid thinking of that while I'm doing it.
Right.
That'll
That's not your process. That's later.
my
Yeah.
process. Yeah, I
So
don't want to be making that kind of precious object.
what's it like when you see just to see this something of
It's like,
yours?
hello. It's like, hey, I see you. But when I see works, like I can actually I remember that piece and seeing it at a distance, like, oh yeah, which for me, because that's a piece that's from 2016. I know what was kind of going on.
Right,
So,
it's your digestive belly, like, so it's, like, so personal to you, and then to see
right,
it out in the world
which is
like
great
that.
because it's out in the world, and I like the fact that people in my work, in my sketchbook page, in the paintings, they can see other things that I was putting in. They don't have the same filters. They don't have the same keys. I can give certain keys about what that night figure meant, about what this figure means to me. But I like the fact that the work can open up to other people's interpretation, like dreams can. I had people in front of a painting like, "Oh, this makes me think of this," and they told me a whole story. And they're like, "I'm sure that has nothing to do with your painting." I'm like, "No, I love this. This feeds me because this gives me things to pull in and rebound from." Like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's so cool. It's so fun talking to you. I really do get inspired, and just not like I'm going to suddenly adopt your practices, but you just have a point of view about it that I believe is really healthy. I love
Mhm.
the intuitive approach. I love to me, art making and art is really not about thinking. That's
Mhm.
why I keep the sketchbooks, and the reason what I get from them is the non-thinking. I even teach a class called Drawing as Meditation to
Mhm.
not think.
But having said that, I would say that being a professional artist, from doing shows and stuff, I try to make sure I have shows that are coherent. Or even if I do a statement to give these ideas, but I don't want that to take over. And I've seen artists that their work it seems to have gotten taken over by this conceptual idea to present the work. I'm like, ah,
Well, it seems like it's a process, a phase thing. Like the concept, things come as feelings, as images, as little bits just at the edge of your consciousness that you're pulling out, and that the painting process itself informs you. And then the ideas come, or the clarity about the what it's about comes later,
comes
versus
later. And
having an
that's why I
idea
feel
that
like
you're contriving a piece of work
it's the
toward.
problem because I don't want to do just riddles or that. Because then sometimes artwork can fall in that where it becomes really clever, but then it's kind of
Yes.
a one line. And when you figured out the message, okay, that's all. Because I want something to be much richer where I can be surprised by it. And that's what one has to be savvy. It's important to think about things, but it needs to be at its place.
Yeah.
I've talked about how we can create or analyze. You can't do both at the same time. What we tend to do as artists, as adults, as try to analyze what we're going to create, and there's nothing worse than that for killing creativity. Like, before we put down the first line, we're already analyzing whether it's good or bad. Well, no, let that happen later.
Yeah, and that's what's so great about your process is when you're in there and that need or desire to analyze comes up. What's this? What's going on? The
Figure
doubt. And you say to yourself, I don't know, doesn't matter, I'll figure it out. And you
it out.
know to unhook from the analyze mode.
Exactly. Or try to. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes, getting kind of stuck in analyzing or wanting to know what it is. But I try to remind myself how much that is the process of like, okay, you don't know. You don't know where it's going to go. You might lose it. That's fine. A lot of it is. And, I remember reading an article about, I think Frank Auerbach, artist. There's an interview from like the 80s. He was talking about in the studio putting down paint at the end of the day, just scraping it all down. I thought that was very interesting. There's so much of art making that is a process. Put stuff down and then we scrape it and it doesn't work. But that's can't get away from that. Well, at least I don't want to get away from that. I don't want to be doing like I talked about earlier about being a god where we just manifest our ideas. That seems to be so much more boring. Or part of it is we go in and we do something and we have days and days and weeks of not getting anything.
Well,
All
it's not manufacturing, it's making.
exactly it's making. So a lot of it is getting in there and then taking it down and then getting in there painting over. And oh, let me try this.
It's
I
humbling.
get, it's what?
Humbling.
It's very humbling. It's
Even
very
for
humbling.
even, you know, you who are a professional artist, been doing
Mm.
this for decades, still in their learning, growing, being
Well, I
humble.
always wanted to stay where I'm asking questions and not giving answers. That is where the real art making is. Keep asking questions. I keep getting where I press it because I've got an idea for a painting. And then I'm like, let's try it. And I'm like, oh, but that's the reality of it. So like just go in and do. You can kind of see the one way up in the corner, that one. That's one that I did. It's been hanging out.
Ooh.
Okay.
Oh wow. Yeah, the colors are fabulous.
Colors were very different from what I use, and
Yep.
you get it's the reds and the purples. And so I went back in, I added this and the bird that came from a sketchbook page. And then I added this round, and I hate it. I've been looking at it, trying to figure out I like this, but this is too harsh. So I'm gonna have to go in and really let go of where I was going and see what I can make out of it. And I don't know. But it took me a long time even to do this. I saw it, had the sketchbook page. It was kind of a reference. When I'm doing it, it took me a month or two to actually get around to actually doing it because I was kind of lazy. I was kind of like, oh, is it going to work? Or am I going to lose all this colored stuff that I painted before? Well, now it's lost. So we'll just move on from there.
Well, I have to say the bird is really intense. It's coming at you. It's
I
really, I
like
mean,
it.
like my eye just keeps going to the bird's eyes. So it's just like that's
And now I have to figure out how to keep that and I don't know yet, but it's
I love
there.
it.
But I did get through. I got that bird. The bird didn't exist.
That's great.
And it wasn't the bird in this, and I knew what I kind of wanted to do, and I finally got around to doing it, and it's still not working, but the bird is there, and I really like that bird.
Yeah, the bird is the word. So
Bird is the word.
we're on stumbling toward genius, and I'm wondering what is your genius? What would you consider your genius or the thing that you're trying to I don't want to say get to or to make or inhabit or be?
It's a tough question because of the saying, "Oh, this is my genius," is a hard thing to say. But I think the idea is this whole well, we talked about the process. Think of having a sound and healthy process is the thing that's been most helpful to me, and it might be the thing that's the most important that I've got. The fact that I've got the sketchbook always with me, that's part of my life. Um, Definitely a trademark for me is having the sketchbook always with me. Not so much the sketchbook in and of itself as the process that utilizes. Always having the sketchbook with me means always trying to stay open to capturing stuff and to exploring stuff. And that's the important. My genius, if you want to call it that, would be that to staying open to the process. And sometimes I fall down. Sometimes I get really struggling, trying to motivate, and I'm just like, oh, I just don't feel it. But I know that's part of the process too. And I've got things set up to be here in my studio with my sketchbook, with my paintings, sit in that discomfort when I'm even there. So that's part of it. Be frustrated, and that's fine. That's part of stretching along. So I try, I guess, maybe for the process, the idea that it's not the result. Everything is a step to something else. Paintings, sketchbook, reading, all of it's a step to something else. It's a process.
Wow, I love it. And I can see that. I think that's true because you inhabit your process, but you're not in some rut with it or some just blasé knowing you're still fresh and interested and open to surprises. I love
Well,
that.
I guess that is the thing, is to
That's your
be
genius,
always
all of it.
to stay fresh, stay open to surprises, to ask questions. Always about asking questions. It's like, oh,
That's
that's
good relationship advice too. So
yeah.
you know, your relationship with yourself, that internal landscape and your art and your process, that's
Mm,
you being in good relationship.
mm, yep, very much true.
Anything else you want to share?
Oh, I mean, we could talk for hours, I'm sure.
And we will always. So, where can we find you? Where can people find more about you and your art?
The best place for me now is on Instagram, and Marcus McAllister.
Is it Marcus McKellar Atelier?
Nope, that's the
Just
old one.
changed it.
That's a whole story. I had to change my Instagram. The other one, they took it away. They deactivated my Instagram account. Not because I was posting stuff. I think I was using an app to follow, and don't do this. They don't like third person apps on Instagram. kind of got caught in that. And I spent, this is actually an interesting struggle just recently. It was in September, August, September. Nowhere. They just shut it down.
Oh my, what a pain.
So all the private messages, all the followers, all the
Oh,
backlog, 6 years, 8 years of Instagram
what?
gone.
Oh,
I spent 2 weeks sending them messages and sending them photos showing it's really me. Never got any response. So I don't even know why. I don't actually. I just
how,
suspect it was something I would anyway.
talk about
And
scraping it down to
it,
nothing.
but and I would have to say this though, it has been a good thing. It actually has. I spent 2 weeks and I found like, okay, you're going to bite the bullet, make a new profile, start over, and all that process because we get used to that is the number of followers, the people I'm in contact with. Just said, okay, let go. And I started a new thing. It's actually been better in the sense that suddenly my Instagram, when I'm on there, I don't have as much of just the old stuff. Well, that I'm following, the algorithms have been different. What I'm getting in my feed is different. So that's been a positive. It's been a good reflection about how I'm using Instagram. So it is the place I'm using. Facebook, I use it as well, but not as much. My own website, I don't update as much. Through Instagram.
Great.
Having even that moment where that tool was taken away from me, realizing, oh, well, everything's impermanent. This is the tool I'm using, and I'm still using, and it's still a good tool. But there may be down the road where it won't be the tool. That's fine. Something else will come along.
I love it. Well, you said, just to go back to one thing you said, that you've been worn out from having to adapt, but actually you're really good at adapting.
Yeah, but
You
it's still
adapted
tiring.
to living in a whole other country and
Yeah,
learning a
yeah.
whole other language and becoming a French citizen. You've put a lot of work into being someone who adapts. I think it's in your nature and
I,
part of your
I think it is
skills.
in my nature, and I do think you're right. I agree with that. I think I'm good at adapting. That doesn't necessarily make it easy. I mean, I think I am good at it, but it's still tiring. And the past few years have been particularly, I think, for everybody. It's not a surprise.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's actually been nice knowing that for everybody it's been difficult. So hey, let's just be nice to each other because we're all
For sure. For sure. Yeah. A little more grace required all around.
right. Yeah, because it's been tiring for everybody. So
Yeah. Well, thank
very
you
good.
so much. I'm certainly not tired
Thank
of
you.
talking to you. I could talk more, but we'll end it here. We'll pick this up again. I'll come see you in
Yes.
Paris. Thanks so much for being on Stumbling Toward Genius.
Thanks for having me. It's been lovely to see you, and we'll be in touch.
Yay. Thanks for listening. I hope this episode inspired you to delight in and lean into your own creative process, whether you use a sketchbook or not. Find images of Marcus's art on this episode's webpage, along with links to things we mentioned in the show. Thanks for listening. Now, go make something.